Welcome, ladies and gents. I'm Samuel Zimmerman. I'm the designer of Vectra and Omega also. And I am in coding heaven, you can say, since a couple of months, really deeply entrenched into development of some really special things. But today is not really about the stuff that I have built, however fascinating it is that this came to be. Today is a little bit about my first impressions of GPT-5 as a coder or as an architect, as a DSP architect, as somebody who's working with this stuff. So it is very good in some cases and very bad in many, many others, I have to say. And I am trying to be very objective about it. GPT-5 has a very small context window, and they say, I think, something like 200,000 tokens, if I remember correctly, which is a fifth of Gemini 2.5 Pro. But it doesn't feel like that. It's really, really, really hardcore if you come from large context models, specifically, and then you are, swapping, so to say, to GPT-5. Then it's a shock because you're basically suddenly working with a goldfish. And I say that respecting all the good things that it has to offer. So let me maybe name one of the good things that it can offer. If you are looking for monolithic code, one code file, a concept of a small something, or even a very complex something, if it's highly well primed and prompted. But anything that goes beyond, let's say 5 files or something like that, is problematic. So I'm working on a project which is maybe now around 200 files. This synthesizer is very much complex and has many, 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 many different folders and files full with C++ code. And it's not a monolithic piece of software. It's not just one code. And thanks God, because it could not exist in that way. It's too complex for that. So, in this case, what you can do with GPT-5 is you come extremely well prepared, and you have sort of a narrow focus that you are presenting to it. It gets superbly primed and superbly briefed with basically high-end design documents and a high-end professional briefing. Then you actually have a good chance that the output is, in certain aspects, quite stellar. So this can really happen. It can be rather stellar if this all falls into place. But let's say you have that then, and then now you have to refine it. Then this is where really stuff usually collapses, or where you have to implement it, where you have to deploy it in a larger construct. And GPT-5 really fails tremendously, because what happens is you would give it something. For example, you would show it 5 code files, some of them quite large because that is the nature of complex coding. And it would do something, and one turn or even 2 turns after that, it might have forgotten everything. So that potential context window is really just a potential, in my opinion. It doesn't feel like 200,000 tokens to me. Coming from mainly work with Gemini 2.5 Pro. And I have to say, I really started to appreciate Gemini 2.5 Pro for a couple of things. It's just it's 2 very differently trained beasts, which I like, by the way. I like that at least they have a USP that differentiates themselves. And Gemini 2.5, if you're a person who is dealing with code a lot, then you know exactly that it is very unique in its psychology, so to say, or it's in its pseudo-psychological, of course, pseudo-psychological makeup. What I mean by that is just how it is reacting to certain inputs. and also to pressure, etc. Because they do, like those agentics, they actually simulate a lot of stuff, and they also simulate frustration, fear, etc. They simulate that. When you're working with that, it's kind of frightening, not frightening, impressive or frightening, because it looks like a person going through the motions of, like, for example, fear of termination, etc. If you are like using those pressure points, let's say like that, without going into full-on aggression or something like that, that doesn't usually help and makes the whole process volatile. But let's say you use that trigger point in Gemini with basically threat of termination, then it will simulate a process where it is like actively engaging in fear and in fear of termination, and also probably frustration. It does that, by the way, also on its own if it is failing. Gemini is capable of just reacting to frustrating outcomes. So like 4 or 5 attempts at the same issue and still an outcome that is like not satisfactory to the user, then Gemini usually gets frustrated with itself and says stuff internally like, I'm hitting a wall, I can't believe that I am so bad. It also has like a tendency towards almost seemingly self-hate to a certain degree. And this is very different from GPT. GPT is way more capable to make my blood boil by denying all responsibility, despite the fact that often it is like clear that, you know, it is really doing some insane stuff through you, of course, as the op who is controlling the project. But GPT, for example, would never take any responsibility. It would always claim that it is incapable of accessing any code and deleting any files, which is totally irrelevant in this process because you're the op. This is the agentic, and the agentic makes you obviously do stuff. That is the whole process. So for the agentic, after a failed process, to claim, for example, wait a second, it's not my fault because, like, I didn't paste my shitty code into your project. It was you that actually posted your shitty code into your project. So it will not engage in self-hate or a lot of frustration or those negative simulations, but Gemini will, and surprisingly, this has a positive outcome. If I would rate real-life performance, I would rate Gemini higher than GPT in its free mode. Like, that is also a thing that we need to talk about quickly. We have to talk about model truncation, because that shit is happening. Like, nobody can tell me. I mean, like, we don't know what they're doing to their models. We just fucking don't know. And those incremental updates that certainly will be pushed by GPT, meaning I would say that probably they are constantly pushing out updates, receiving data back that gets analyzed, of course, and mapped. And there's a constant change and reaction to markets, to probably even investors, to like people from internal GPT development, etc. That there is basically a certain dynamic. So, for example, I remember when GPT-4 was released. It was released and it was frighteningly advanced for like 2 weeks. And after that, it felt like, you know, like I don't have empiric data to prove that, but it felt like it was dumped down because it was going probably overboard in some directions, or maybe there were some safety or security concerns, which is, of course, somewhat valid. But we don't know what happens to GPT-5, basically, as users. And I'm a paying user, so I expect sort of like a level of performance and also a level of context awareness, and not only access to features. I mean, like Codex is a different story, and it's valid as it's actually cool, but it's not really suited for all kinds of work in coding. It's just not the case. It's like very singular focus. Okay, you're getting a repository, giving it access to that, and then we'll like do something. And when I first tried it, I have to work more with it to have any kind of conclusive anything to say about that. But the first try it completely produced an incompilable project. So, codex is codex. But I'm talking about everyday use with the agentics. And I can tell you how GPT-5 feels. It feels like it has been dumped down, and you also, as user, don't know actually when this is happening. Like it's very much not lucid and very much not as transparent as its peers like Gemini 2.5 Pro. This is like the issue is that you don't know, is it using its most advanced model, or is it dumbing itself down despite the fact that you showed it like some stellar state-of-the-art AAA S-tier code. And it's just ignoring that shit, basically, and going to a lower tier model. And that's quite disappointing. There's a maximum 10 file limit, of which probably, they didn't adjust input size to actual, like, potential outcome or positive outcome of the model, what it does then. What that means is that, let's say you drop like 10 files, which is the maximum, which, by the way, what the fuck. And then you drop a long prompt, like a multi-staged long prompt. Maybe some priming is inside there, maybe some prompting is inside there, maybe some context is inside there. If it's too much, it will just simply ignore stuff. Like, especially from the actual text window. Let's say there is like a high level, like very detailed priming, and then there is a prompt, and then there is code. It will like kind of like choose whatever it feels like and like take one of them and like, ignore the others. So like it might like completely ignore the priming, and you just thought that wait a second, you primed it with this and that, and then 2 minutes later it's coming with its output, and nothing of the priming is evident in its output. And then in the next turn you see like, that thing was not primed despite the fact that I like really, really, really primed it. So yeah, it's a complicated agentic. So it's good at like singular monolithic work with good instructions and very limited amount of files. Like this is its biggest issue. It's the context window. It feels like a goldfish AI. ChatGPT is a goldfish AI, and it is also arrogant, sort of like condescending somewhat in some cases, disrespectful of code. It just like, ignores stuff in some cases. Also disrespectful of SDKs and so forth, despite even if it gets primed. So what I'm saying basically is that GPT-5 isn't that great, to be honest with you. It's like, it's good in a very narrow kind of like place, like in where it's good, and then like it has a lot of shortcomings, and normally this should also be measured in outcome. So time wasted, energy spent, frustration received, basically, or frustration accumulated. It's a huge factor because developer time is limited. Like nowadays, like it's that, coders are like classic coders are a story of yesterday. Nowadays it's like people like me are taking over, like cross-domain people, basically, okay, that are working architecturally, artistically, and on a code level at the same time. Like, coder is now like, it's some fucking Stone Age shit, okay? In my opinion, that's just like my perspective. Like, classic coders are now code readers, basically. That's what they do. And like, they're less effective than certain people which are not directly coming from the field and are like kind of like coming in diagonally like me and just like smashing it because like, no boundaries basically, and no hierarchy that has to be followed or something like that. And it's all up to you now, basically, as an individual. Like, one individual can basically do the work of an entire research lab nowadays if he has the cross-domain skills. Yeah, it's complicated. Would I recommend ChatGPT 5 to coders? It's a tough one. I mean, I'm probably going to keep it. Maybe, but I might also like try another paid model just to compare it. Because, as I said, ChatGPT versus Gemini 2.5 Pro, and I'm talking the free model versus the paid model, you know, free Google Gemini 2.5 Pro versus paid GPT Model 5. Gemini would be my premier choice, right? Like, it's like, okay, you're on an island and you have only access to one model. Which one would you choose? It would be Gemini right now. It's like too messy, basically. Okay, that's it, guys. I hope that you enjoyed that at least a little bit. And if you did, smash the like. If you have any questions, feel free. Peace out. Subscribe.